Chapter 20 Food and Drink. On the continent, people have good food. In England, people have good table manners, said by George Smythe, humorist. You can't trust people who cook as badly as that. Jacques Chirac, President of France. As the two quotes above exemplify, Britain and good food are two things which are not commonly associated. Visitors to Britain often have varying opinions about all sorts of aspects of the country, but most seem to agree that the food is terrible. Why? The answer cannot be that British tastes are different from everybody else's. The most common complaint is not that British food has a strange, unpleasant taste, but rather that it has very little taste at all. The vegetables, for example, are overcooked. It is all too bland. Another possible explanation is that most visitors to Britain do not get the opportunity to sample home cooking. They either eat the food cooked in an institution, such as a university canteen, or in rather cheap restaurants or cafes. These places are definitely not where to find good British food. Typical British cooking involves a lot of roasting. Roast beef with roast potatoes and vegetables is supposed to be the English national dish, which does not suit the larger scale production or the quick preparation which is required in such places. For one thing, food should, according to British people, be eaten hot, which is difficult to arrange when feeding large numbers of people. Eating habits and attitudes. The explanations above can only serve as a partial excuse for the unfortunate reputation of British cuisine. Even in fast food restaurants and everyday cafes, the quality seems to be lower than it is in equivalent places in other countries. Life and habits in Britain are simply not oriented to food very much. The country has neither a widespread restaurant culture nor cafe society. In the middle of the day, people just want to eat up quickly. The lunch break is an hour at most. The coffee is often horrible, not because British people prefer it that way, but because they just don't care very much. When they go to a cafe, they go there for relaxation, conversation, and caffeine. The quality of the coffee itself is of comparatively minor importance. Expectations are low. Even at home, food and drink are given relatively little attention. The coffee is often just as bad as it is in the cafes. British supermarkets sell far more instant coffee than what the fewer people who drink it often call real coffee. Instant coffee is less trouble. Meals tend to be eaten quickly and a table cleared. Parties and celebrations are not normally centered around the food. When the British do pay attention to food, it is most frequently not to appreciate it, but to consider its health implications. There are quite large numbers of vegetarians in Britain, and an even larger number who are aware of food from the point of view of health. Health food shops are as abundant in the country's high streets as delicatessens. When in 2005 the TV chef Jamie Oliver showed how the food in a city school could be improved, and also what rubbish the kids were getting, there was a public outcry, and Jamie soon found himself presenting a petition signed by 270,000 parents to Downing Street demanding more money for school dinners. As it had recently also been revealed that France spent 3 times more per child than Britain on its school meals, the government was quick to oblige. But changing habits is hard work. In 2006, after one school had decided to stop its pupils from going out to the local fast food eateries at lunchtime, a group of parents, enraged by this imposition, started handing their children their favorite hamburgers and frozen pizzas through the school railings. Ultimately, The explanation for these poor standards, low expectations, and lack of general interest in food and drink is historical. Until the second half of the 20th century, the ruling classes in Britain, and thus the opinion leaders, had been educated at boarding schools, where they were, deliberately, given rather plain food to eat. They were encouraged to be hard and pure, not soft and sensual. Too much enthusiasm for food was seen as decadent, and, indeed, foreign. In addition, British people have been mostly urban, with little contact with the land, for longer than the people of other countries. They are therefore rather ignorant of the origins of what arrives on the dinner table or in their lunch boxes. In 2004, a poll of children aged 8 to 11 found that half of them thought that margarine came from cows, a third thought that ham came from chickens, and a quarter reckoned bread was made from potatoes or rice. Perhaps this is why the range of plants and animals which British people eat is rather narrow. There are plenty of enthusiastic British meat eaters who feel quite sick at the thought of eating horse meat. To most people, the idea of going out to pick wild plants for the table is exotic. It is perhaps significant that when the British want to refer to the people of another country insultingly, they often allude to their eating habits. Because of the strange things they do with cabbage, for example, the Germans are krauts. Because of their outrageous taste for frog legs, the French are frogs. However, this conservatism is not nearly as extreme as it used to be. In the 1960s, it was reported that the first British package tourists in Spain not only insisted on eating traditionally British fish and chips, but also on having them, as was traditional, wrapped up in specially imported British newspaper. A lot has changed since that time. Items which 50 years ago were thought exotic and viewed with suspicion, such as peppers, garlic, and olive oil, are now to be found in every shop selling food. The country's supermarket shelves are full of the ingredients needed for cooking dishes from all over the world. The increasing multicultural mix has helped in this respect. In fact, the package holiday makers seem to have imported some European dishes. For example, as well as various traditional British dishes, an extraordinary number of pubs now offer dishes such as moussaka and lasagna. The latter dish is reported to be the country's most popular ready meal. This claim is also sometimes made for chicken tikka masala, which can perhaps claim to be the modern British national dish, because it was invented in Britain by a Bangladeshi chef who adapted chicken tikka to British tastes. British people are also showing increasing interest in the pure enjoyment aspect of food. There are numerous cookery and food programs on TV, all of them watched with close enthusiasm. It is possible, then, that a negative reputation of British food will eventually become a historical hangover. Attitudes have changed, but the quality of food in everyday life is still poor because these changes have not had enough time to change habit and expectations. One final example. In 2005, the buffet bar of the Eurostar train had a special offer. If you bought a sandwich, you could buy a soft drink and something sweet at an especially low price. There was a poster in the bar advertising the offer. It showed a Coca-Cola and a chocolate bar, with a slogan written in Dutch, French, and English. The Dutch and French version of the slogan translated into English as "a little something extra." But the English version was "make it a meal." Only in English could a can of fizzy drink and an industrially produced chocolate bar, when combined with a sandwich, be described as a meal. Eating out. Not so long ago, going to a restaurant was a rare event for most British people. Regular eating out was confined to the richest section of society. By now a far larger number of people do it, but because of its history there remains an element of snobbery attached to it. Merely being in an expensive restaurant sometimes seems to be more important to people than the food eaten in it, and in such restaurants, and even some less expensive ones, in a country where few public notices appear in any language other than English, you find a unique phenomenon. Many of the dishes have non-English names, most commonly French, reflecting the general high regard for French cuisine. The only exception to this rule is the puddings, which is the one course of a meal that the British have always been confident about. There is another reason for this lack of English nomenclature. Very few restaurants in Britain could be described as British, that is, they do not serve distinctively British food, so the names of the dishes are not in English. History may also help to explain this fact. Because it did it so rarely, people wanted something different when they went out to eat. By now, people have got used to several kinds of ethnic cuisine, and Britain's towns and cities are almost totally dominated by restaurants offering them. A survey in 2006 found that fully a quarter of all restaurants in Glasgow were Italian, that in London there were no less than 87 kebab outlets per square mile, and that in Nottingham you could visit a different Italian restaurant every week for half a year, and a different Indian one every week for 9 months. Even the smallest towns have at least one Indian restaurant, one Italian, and probably a Chinese one as well. Thai restaurants have also become numerous in recent decades. Larger towns and cities have restaurants representing cuisine from all over the world. Apart from pubs, only three types of distinctively British eating places exist. One offers mostly fried food of the English breakfast type, and for this reason it is sometimes known as a greasy spoon. Traditionally, it is used principally by manual workers, and is therefore also sometimes called a workman's cafe, pronounced "caf". But these Traditionally, it is used principally by manual workers, and is therefore also sometimes called a workman's cafe. But these days, when there are fewer manual workers, it is also used by anybody who wants a filling meal and likes the informal atmosphere. Many of them are transport cafes at the sides of main roads. Second, there is a fish and chips shop, used mainly for takeaway meals. Again, the fish is fried. Finally, there are establishments in the centre of towns which are commonly referred to as tea rooms. They are open only during the day, and cater for a different kind of clientele, with waitress service. They serve scones and other light snacks, and, of course, tea. Fast food outlets are probably more common in Britain than they are in most other countries. Cynics might claim this is because the British have no taste. However, their popularity is probably better explained sociologically. Except for greasy spoons, other types of restaurant still retain echoes of social pretension, so that some people feel uncomfortable in them. A fast food place does not have these associations, and they are cheap. On the one hand, it is accepted and liked as an integral, deeply rooted part of the national culture, and the prevalent attitude to getting drunk is that, provided it does not lead to violence, there is no shame attached. On the other hand, the Puritan tradition has led to the widespread assumption that drinking is something dangerous which should therefore be restricted, with regard to both who can do it and also where it can be done. Most people, including regular drinkers, consider that it would be wrong to give a child even half a glass of beer. Quite frequently, horror stories appear in the media about the shocking amount of alcohol drunk by teenagers. By law, people cannot be served or drink any kind of alcohol in pubs until the age of 18. In fact, both teenage drinking and alcohol consumption generally are often regarded these days as major social problems, even though the British actually consume less alcohol per head of population than many other countries in Europe. Perhaps this is because for many people, drinking is confined to pubs. Most cafes are not allowed to serve beer or wine, and these drinks are not as much a part of home life as they are in some other European countries. For most of the 20th century, pubs operated under strict laws which limited their opening hours. These have now been relaxed. Moreover, many more types of shop now sell alcohol than previously. However, this lessening of the negative attitude to alcohol has been balanced by increasing concerns about its impact on health and safety. Government-sponsored guidelines state the maximum amount of alcohol which it is advisable for people to drink in a week without endangering their health. Although millions of people pay little attention to these, the general feeling that alcohol can be bad for you has increased. Nevertheless, alcohol, especially beer, remains an important part of the lives of many people. The occasional trip across a channel solely for the purpose of buying cheaper beer and wine in France or Belgium is such a regular part of many people's calendar that it has led to a well-known colloquial coinage, the booze cruise. At the time of writing, there is continuing debate about licensing laws. When further relaxing of the laws was planned in 2005, it caused a major political row. The medical profession, residents groups, and most, but not all of the police, were against the plan. One national newspaper organized a campaign to stop it. Much of the debate revolves around the issue of binge drinking. There has always been something of a problem of public drunkenness in Britain, and the perception these days is that among young people it is an epidemic. Those who want fewer regulation argue that this would reduce drunkenness, which, they say, is largely the result of having to drink too fast. And indeed there is no doubt that the average British drinker finishes the drink more quickly than the average drinker of other European countries. This is a habit born of generations, subject to limited drinking time. They have a vision of introducing to Britain the more civilized drinking habits of mainland Europe. Pubs. The British pub is unique. This is not just because it is different in characters from bars or cafes in other countries. It is also because it is different from any other public place in Britain itself. Without pubs, Britain would be a less sociable country. The pub is the only indoor place where the average person can comfortably meet others, even strangers, and get into prolonged conversation with them. In cafes and fast food places, people are expected to eat, drink, and get out. The atmosphere in other eating places makes some people feel uncomfortable, but pubs are classless. A pub with 40 customers in it is nearly always much noisier than a cafe or restaurant with the same number of people in it. The local pub plays an important role in almost every neighborhood, and pubs, it should be noted, are predominantly for the drinking of beer and spirits. Indicative of this role is the fact that it is commonly referred to as the local, and people who go there are often known as regulars. The action in all of the country's most popular soaps revolves around a pub. As with other aspects of British life, pubs have become a bit less distinctive in the last 30 years. They used to serve almost nothing but beer and spirits, and the only things to eat you could get were bar snacks such as peanuts and crisps. These days you can get wine, coffee, and hot food at most of them as well. This has helped to widen their appeal. Nevertheless, pubs have retained their special character. One of their notable aspects is that there is no waiter service. If you want something, you have to go and ask for it at a bar. This may not seem very welcoming, and a strange way of making people feel comfortable and relaxed, But to British people it is precisely this. To be served at a table is discomforting for many people. It makes them feel they have to be on their best behaviour. But because in pubs you have to go and fetch your drinks yourself, it is more informal. You can get up and walk around whenever you want, like being in your own house. This home from home aspect of the pub is encouraged by the relationship between customers and those who work there. The latter are expected to know the regulars personally, to know what their usual drink is, and to chat with them when they are not serving someone. It is also encouraged by the availability of pub games, most typically darts, and frequently a television. A notable aspect of British pubs is their frequent appeal to the idea of tradition. For example, each has its own name, proclaimed on a sign hanging outside, always with old-fashioned associations. Many are called by the name of some aristocrat, example, the Duke of Cambridge, or after a monarch. Others take their names from some traditional occupation, for example, the Bricklayers' Arms, or they often have rural associations, for example, the Sheep Shearers or the Bull. To call a pub the Computer Programmers or Ford Focus or something like that would be to make a very definite statement. For the same reason, the person who runs a pub is referred to as the landlord, even though he or she is in reality a tenant. Nearly all pubs are owned by commercial companies. The landlord is simply employed by the company as its manager. But the word is used because it evokes earlier times when all pubs were privately owned inns where travellers could find a bed for the night.